Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Wednesday, June 29th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Notre Dame game is in 66 days, the game against Michigan in 150 days. A couple of pieces of housekeeping off the top of the show. As Alex Kleitman and I were expecting when we recorded Tuesday's show, cornerback Kyan Lee did in fact manage to commit in the small window between the time that show was recorded and then, of course, when it was released. Welcome to podcasting. You can get a deep dive on his commitment and the impact for the rest of that class on a very special episode of the Buckeye Weekly podcast that dropped Monday night. And we also generally don't make a big deal out of the Buckeyes offering a player a scholarship, but we're going to make an exception for this one. Landon Pace, a 2024 tight end, got an offer from the Buckeyes on Tuesday. His older brother Jalen is currently a walk-on in Ohio State. You may also remember his dad Orlando, who played a little bit of offensive line in Columbus back in the 1990s. Now on to the topic of today's show and someone else who was at Ohio State back in the 1990s. We have talked a lot recently about the recruiting impact of Ryan Day in terms of the types of quarterbacks and wide receivers the Buckeyes are signing each year. And once those players get to campus, they've been almost completely rewriting the Ohio State record books. This fall, C.J. Stroud has a chance to do that in a very big way, so we're going to take a look at the passing records that might be in the most danger of falling. My guest today is the aforementioned Ohio State 1990s alumnus, Kevin Noon. He's the host of the Big Me Kickoff Podcast. Kevin, thanks for being here.
You're making me feel old, man. That's I didn't sign up for that. I mean, if I wanted to be mistreated, I would just stay at home.
That's when you're on a show with Tony. That's when if I wanted to be mistreated, I would do a show with Tony. Yes, I sent Kevin a list of 15 records that I thought were potentially in danger for this year. We're gonna let him rank the 10 that he thinks are the most likely to get broken by C.J. Stroud this fall. I'll just run through just the records. Number of passing yards in a single game, passing yards in a single season, passing attempts in a game, passing attempts in a season, completions in a game, completions in a season, completion percentage in a season, touchdown passes in a game, touchdown passes in a season, passing yards per game, consecutive passes completed in a game, number of consecutive games with 200 yards passing, number of games with 200 plus yards passing in a career, number of games with 300 yards passing in a season, 300 yards passing in a career, 400 yard passing games in a season, and 400 yards passing games in a career. All right, so that's the whole list. The first one, the one that Kevin thought was the most likely to get broken this year, the record of 373 completions in a season. That was Dwayne Haskins back in 2018. CJ Stroud had 317, so missed it by, I can do math, 56, give or take, last year. So, Kevin, why is that one that you think is the most likely to fall this year?
Well, if you sit there and you base this on a 14-game season, if Ohio State plays fewer than 14 games, I think fans are going to be kind of angry based on what Ohio State has. You have to go for about 26.7, I think it is. I was doing the math real quick. I mean, not in my head. I was using a calculator. Just shy of 27 completions a game. I think that's very real. I don't think we're going to have a case of where CJ Stroud's not going to play in a game, but you have 12 games, which is the regular season. A Big Ten championship game would be 13, and then a bowl game or a national semifinals would be 14. Now, if they go to 15, that means they get to a national championship game. But even if we expand it out, I'm not going to sit there and get on my phone to start doing math or whatever. I was told there'd be no math. I don't think that this is really that far out of the reach. If we're going to talk about these other 9 records, this one seems to be a slam dunk because without this one, I think a lot of these other ones don't happen, and we're going to, it's going to be a short conversation.
Well, and one thing that's important when we're talking about, because he put up some big numbers last year, it's important to remember they only played 13 games, plus he didn't play in the Akron game, so he only really played 12 games last year. You could see 2 to 3 additional games for him. That's an additional 25% if you go 12 to 15. That is quite a bit more. So yeah, that's why I think a lot of these are in definite danger. That is certainly one of them. Another one that is definitely in danger. Number 2, 9 games of 300 plus yards passing in a season. That's actually, fun fact, that's also the career season, the career record for Ohio State as well. 9 games in a career. C.J. Stroud had 9 in 2021. Dwayne Haskins had 9 in 2018. If he did 9 last year in only 12 games, it seems pretty likely he'll get to 10 or more in 14 to 15, I guess.
Yeah, and there are like several that I was like, well, that could be one. Well, that could be one. And at some point, you just have to sit there and put some on the list. So, not he already did it in what we're going to assume is going to be fewer games. So it's going to be there. I mean, Something that was a disqualifier for me on some of the records is the fact that I think that the running game is going to be a little bit more obvious this year. And that's, I sit there and I say that, and Trevion Henderson had a tremendous year, and we, for a good part of the year, we were talking about, is he going to be a freshman Heisman finalist or whatnot? And then, kind of the final taste in our mouths with the Ohio State running game was, well, it was sort of there. It's kind of what everybody remembers. I think that they're going to do a little bit more emphasis on trying to balance that offense out a little bit, but 300 yards is, I remember when 300 yards passing for Ohio State was like, oh my God, you boys, you guys just witnessed something out there. I'm telling you. Now it's almost like ho-hum, 300, whatever. So I don't necessarily see this as being something that's out of the realm or out of the possibility. I mean, let's be honest. It's what, 75 yards a quarter, 75, 150 times 2 is 300. I think we're going to expect to see Stroud only play 3 quarters in some games, but then you're saying, okay, well, you're going to do 100 yards a quarter. Well, when Ohio State just has these huge chunk plays and these huge scoring drives, and they have 60, 70-yard touchdown passes, those numbers are just going to sort themselves out.
Yeah, it looked like a pinball machine at times last year. Just I think back to like the first half of the Michigan State game, where the halftime numbers would have been, pretty high up in the Ohio State record books for single games before the Ryan Day era. So yeah, I think that's definitely one that I think there's a very, very high likelihood that he hits 9 games of 300 plus, either injury or the fact that that he is going to not potentially be playing in the second half of Arkansas State type of games. Maybe that holds him under 300 yards, but yeah, there's not a lot that's going to hold him under 300 yards if he's healthy and on the field, I would think. Number 3, this is another one that I looked at and thought, yeah, this is pretty likely because he just set the record last year, 71.9% completion percentage in a season. Dwayne Haskins, I think, was the record holder before that at like 70.2. Stroud ended up 71.9 last year, and you think he could potentially be even better than that this year.
Kind of went back and forth, not on including this on my list, but where I was going to put this on my list. Because you sit there and you're going to say, okay, it's CJ Stroud. He's a year more advanced, and he's more confident in the offense, everything else. Ryan Day's more confident in him. All of that's very important. But then you take Garrett Wilson, you take Chris Olave off the table. So, heck, you take Jeremy Ruckert off the table. Not that he was on the receiving end of a lot of those completions, but still he was a kind of a comforting force out there. So I kind of went back and forth, but I just think that if this is the CJ Stroud that we're expecting, and what we saw obviously from Marvin Harrison Jr., what we're expecting out of Emeka Egbuka, what are we going to see out of a healthy Cam Babb, Jaden Ballard, obviously the oft-injured Julian Fleming. Oh, and then this guy, Jackson Smith-Njigba, he's pretty good at the catching of the football. I don't think that hitting 72.0% or beyond that is really out of the stretch of the imagination. And again, I'm predicating all of these predictions and numbers based upon Ohio State having an expected good season. If things go awry or whatever, he goes into a junior slump or something, then that's all moot. We can pull this one out and we can send it to freezing cold takes. But I think that one is very much doable.
Yeah, last year only has to be a little bit better this year than he was last year. So yeah, that seems very much in the realm of possibility. Another one that, to break this one, they have to play 15 games. To tie this one, they would just have to play 14. But 14 consecutive games with 200 yards passing, that was Dwayne Haskins in 2018. The best Stroud managed last year was 9 because during that Tulsa game, he only ended up with 185, I believe, yards passing in the Tulsa game. That was the game where Tulsa said, all right, you're not going to be able to throw the ball, so you're going to have to run it. And Trevion Henderson said, okay, and ran for 270-something yards. So, 14 consecutive games with 200 yards passing. It feels like if they get to 15 games and he's healthy, this is pretty much a gimme. But they have to get to 15 games and he has to stay healthy. So that's why I wonder, this is higher than I probably would have had this one.
You mean I don't get credit for games that he did last year? It doesn't carry over? Because this is kind of a, this is a longevity mark.
That's you know what that's true because this is the record for one season and it's also the record for multiple seasons. So technically, yes. Okay, so in that case, then yes, then this one might be low in that case.
You see, I kind of, I went back and forth, and I'm like, I'm not really in Tom's head. Don't want to be, but I'm like, what is the true intention here? And I figured it was we're starting it over. This isn't Oral Hershiser and his 58 and 2/3 innings, and where it's not going to carry over into the following season, into the '89 season. But
too soon.
Yeah, they have to get to 14 games, obviously, if I'm not getting credit for the previous season. I obviously have been on record of saying I expect Ohio State to win the Big Ten. I expect them to go Big Ten championship game. I expect good things from that. So I think 14 games is kind of the minimum. And in order to get there, they're going to have to do well. You're just not going to be able to have a 170 thrown in there. Trevion Henderson is capable of going for 3 bills. I mean, we saw him get close to it in that Tulsa game, as you'd mentioned. But, you're going to hear me say this a lot. If they're doing what we're expecting them to do, this one seems pretty easy because too higher. We just talked about 9 games of 300 plus, and you even gave me the list of 400 on some of these things, and 200 easy. I mean, it's just a matter of playing in the games and not having fate intervening.
Yeah, and those are 2 separate records in the Ohio State record book, even though it is the same number. The number of consent games in one season, the number of games over in a career, the high number is the same number for both of them. So yes, for one season that's a little bit difficult. For career, that seems like that's going to be one he can definitely get to. Another one that seems like the same multiplication problem that we gave you earlier, where you're going from 12 games played to potentially 14 or 15. Last year he had 4,435 yards passing. The career or the single season record 4,831 yards passing by Dwayne Haskins. So he was just 396 yards short of that last year. You would figure 2 more games, 3 more games, even if they're running the ball a little bit more, and you don't necessarily have the 537 yards or whatever it was in the Rose Bowl last year, or 573 yards in the Rose Bowl last year. Even if you don't have a big blow up game like that, with a couple extra games, this is another one that I looked at and thought that is definitely one we're going to have to keep track of over the course of the year.
I debated this one. This one, again, was not one that I was like, I don't know if I want to put on the list. It was, do I want to have it 5? Do I want to have it 8? Do I want to have it 10? Do I want to have it 2? 4831, which is the magic number, would be 345.1, 0.071, so 0.1 yards per game on 14 games. I'm not going. I mean, you get to the playoff, you don't know what's going to happen. Strange things happen. I'm just not going to base anything off of 15. So I'm going to just base everything off of 14 when I do math. And 345 doesn't seem that bad, because I'm going to go back to an earlier point. We talk about not playing in second halves or certainly fourth quarters. In order to get yourself off the field, it means you probably had to play pretty well in the first half. So I don't think 345, or I don't think 300 in the first half and then 45. You generally don't pull a guy. It's like, at half, we're done with you. You want him out there 1-2 series, kind of see what he does, see what happens with adjustments. And then here are your orange slices, give us your helmet, and just, let's call it a day. So I don't think 345 is really out of the realm of possibility. Plus, too, Ohio State's schedule is, there are some challenges on there, but there's some get fat games as well. There's some games where I think Ohio State could sit there and Stroud, without even really thinking about it, if you're not watching, he's going to be at 445 already in the game. It's going to be like, all right, well, we got to call the dogs off. And you get a couple 445s in there compared to 345s. That brings that rest of the average down a little bit of where you have to get to.
Back in the 90s, the players called those games Saturday, where it was just, you were playing Illinois. Illinois was terrible, and it was like, well, we're gonna pad those stats this week. That was you may see some of those this year. Another thing, we haven't talked about this. We've talked about the running game and the role that might play. If Ohio State's got a better defense, you wonder that might actually hold some of these numbers down, because if the defense is only giving up 10 points instead of giving up 27 points to an opponent, you take your foot off the gas a little bit earlier, potentially getting out of the game a little earlier, you're running the ball more in the second half of those games. So, you think back to the 2018 team, and why did Dwayne Haskins roll up all those numbers? Well, number one, they couldn't run the ball all that well. And number two, the defense couldn't get off the field and kept giving up lots of points. So that's another thing that might be working against. I mean, it's working in Ohio State's favor, but might be working against C.J. Stroud in a little bit on some of these. Next one up, this is very similar to number 4, so we don't need to belabor it too much, but 24 career games of 200-plus yards passing. Stroud had 11 in 2021, so he would just need to get 14 this year of 200-plus. Again, this seems like if he's healthy, this is one that he should definitely do.
Get us back on time, I'll just say yes.
All right, next one. You were just talking about the number of games, passing yards he needed to hit a certain number, and it was 340 something. If he gets 369.6 passing yards per game, that's what he did last year. You have him potentially beating that, so 370 passing yards or more basically this year. That's a lot of passing yards, and that's not one where you're going to hit, having an extra game or two helps you. This is a yards per game metric, so that's one that I think this to me feels like where you're starting to maybe take a little bit of a turn into, okay, maybe this is a little bit more difficult for him to hit.
It is, and again, here was my methodology when I did this. You give me 15. I went through and I found the 5 that I were like, these are the longest shots, and I took them off the list. They're gone. So then I had 10, and then I started plugging them in. And you're right, here at 7 is about, I think that 1 through 4 were interchangeable. 5 and 6 kind of lived in the middle, and then I think 7 through 10 could have gone in really any order at that point. 370 certainly, 369.7 would break the record, but 370 is a lot, but we've seen it before. And we talk about, they're going to, if the defense is better, they're not going to do this, and if they're rolling teams, they're not going to do this. But if they want CJ Stroud to be a Heisman candidate, he's going to need to do some stuff. And that doesn't mean that you're going to sit there and go out and we're like, we're going to embarrass these teams. And you don't want to be in a situation of where you're starting the 23 season with a very green Kyle McCord and a very green Devin Brown and whoever the 23 incoming true freshman quarterback is and say, well, we'll figure it out now. But with that being said, I think there are going to be some moments where you have to give CJ Stroud the opportunity to have his Heisman moment. And I think with that, it's going to keep him throwing a little bit more. Plus, too, Ryan Day isn't really making a lot of friends in the Big Ten, so he's just going to sit there and punish these fools.
There might be a game or two where Ryan Day keeps his foot on the gas a little longer than he might have otherwise. You might have bookend games at the beginning and end of the season where Ryan Day wouldn't mind keeping the pedal down a little bit more based on some things that have been said from the folks on the opposing sideline. Last 3, number 8. 16 consecutive passes completed in a game. I went back and tried to look. I felt like he was close to this in the Rose Bowl, and there were a bunch of strings of 9 or 8, and it was all broken up by 1. So I don't think he got particularly close to this last year, unless there was one I wasn't thinking of. This was, of course, J.T. Barrett in the third and fourth quarter of that 2017 Penn State game, that dramatic comeback in the horseshoe when they were wearing those gray uniforms. This is one where it feels like this could easily happen, but also it requires almost a perfect day. Now I'm thinking back. You can explain this a little bit. I'm going to look up the Michigan State game. I just thought in the first half of that Michigan State game.
That's what he had 17.
Oh, he did 17. Okay,
he had 17 against Michigan State. And I'm like, Tom, I just don't know if we're on the same wavelength here on this one. And I didn't catch it in pre-production.
I was thinking through. I was like, I feel like he broke this last year. It wasn't in the Rose Bowl, so I thought, no, that's not it. Okay, so 17. I blame our friends from the Sports Information Department for not having an updated record book yet, but I'm sure that's coming soon. That's our fault for recording this show a little too early in the summer. So, all right, 17 is the consecutive passes completed in a game. We've seen it done now, so can he do it again?
This one was, you told me I could go as short as 7 of these. I'm like, well, I'm going to 10. I want to make sure that, we're giving our viewers and our listeners everything we can. So I'm going to 10. And this one was one that I was like, well, we have seen it. And, well, they're going to play some teams that probably are not great, but that Michigan State secondary was last in the nation at the time that Ohio State played them. Last. And you could sit there and go nuts, and you could be a unanimous Heisman winner and not get anywhere close to 17 consecutive completions. Because a lot of that, too, you could sit there and hit somebody. You could hit Jackson Smith and Jigba right in the numbers. And if he doesn't have his concentration, the ball hits the turf. I mean, so that one is something that there's a lot to it. But who am I to bet against C.J. Stroud? But that one seems to be kind of a tough one just based on everything there. And again, you're just going to be spreading it out. You lose the safety net of Olave and Wilson. And that's not taking anything away from, Ohio State's going to have a top national receiving corps once again. But that one's going to be tough. I'm talking myself into wishing I would have taken it off the list or put it 10 right now.
Yeah, there's a lot that can go wrong there, and it feels like any given day he could do that, but there's so many things. It's like a hitting streak in baseball. So many things can go wrong where you don't get the pitches one day, or the fielders are in the right spot, or you hit a bad hop that skips right to a fielder or whatever, hit an atom ball. There's so many things that can go wrong on any of these individual plays that's a hard thing to bet on. I'm going to combine the last two because they're pretty similar. 6 touchdown passes in a game, and then 50 touchdown passes in a season. 6 touchdown passes in a game feels like one where you might see that in the, give him a Heisman moment kind of conversation. You might see that just as a little bit of an exclamation point. Maybe you're playing a decent but not incredible team. We've all watched the halftime shows. Here's a little dirty little secret. Not all Heisman voters, not all poll voters are watching every second of every game. A lot of times they're seeing the highlight package. Either you're watching the highlight package on YouTube, the 5-minute highlight package, or sometimes if you're really lazy, you're just watching the halftime highlights on, the primetime ABC broadcast or ESPN broadcast or whatever. Just close your eyes. They go to halftime, and the studio host says, Ohio State completely destroyed, fill in the blank, Iowa, Rutgers, whatever today. A school record-setting 7 touchdown passes for C.J. Stroud, and it's just like 2 highlights of C.J. Stroud throwing 90-yard touchdowns to whoever, and that's it. And it's just, and then that his big splashy numbers become the entire story there. Just think back to 2006, where Troy Smith, his Heisman moment against Penn State, that was a terrible game. He played terribly. They scored 28 points, and two of the touchdowns were on pick sixes. But he had that one incredible play where he was scrambling around, running around, and long touchdown pass in the end zone. That's all you saw in halftime. You saw that, and then you saw a pick six. And it was like, oh, Heisman moment. And it was like, well, the rest of the game was terrible. But guess who won the Heisman that year, Kevin?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the thing is like we have, I'm so bullish on all these yardage things, but yardage doesn't necessarily mean touchdowns. I mean, they could sit there and hand the ball off to Mayan Williams at the 4 and have him finish off drives, and you're not going to get to the 6 touchdown passes. But, you still end up having C.J. Stroud leading them from the 25 to the 4. I mean, with the vast majority of that yardage coming via the pass. And, so once again, there's just kind of a lot to it in terms of, are you throwing for it? Are you running for it? I mean, Ohio State had to throw for a lot of touchdowns in games because they weren't, the red zone offense was inconsistent at times. So you'd run into that. But, we go back to the Michigan State game where 17 consecutive passes happened, and he threw the 6 touchdowns in the first half of that game. I mean, that was, he joins the record book. Well, he needs his own page on that one. He did in the first half. He didn't do it over 2.5 quarters, 3 quarters, 4 quarters. I mean, this was done in a half. So, I mean, there's something to be said about that. And then the 50 touchdowns in a season, once again, you looked at an offense that maybe wasn't as balanced and, there, and they had to do it that way. You got Trevion Henderson, you have Mayan Williams. What do you get from other backs at this point? But, they certainly are going to try and balance things off. So 50 just, that's a lot of touchdowns. That is a lot of passing touchdowns and that one just seems to be difficult to get to, in my opinion. But again, you sit there and you have, if he goes for 6 in 3 games, he has 3 games where he has 6. That's 18. That's 18 right now, and based on our 14-game season model that we're kind of just talking about, so that then he has to do what, 33 over 11 games, which is 3 a game. I mean, my math is good. I can figure that one out. That seems entirely plausible if he sits there and he drops the hammer on Rutgers, Arkansas State, and somebody. I mean, it's all very doable.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing. We're talking about breaking Ohio State records, and Ohio State's been playing football since 1890. And yes, the game has changed a bunch, and yes, it is a very different era with passing and all that kind of stuff. And we're just kind of like casually saying, yeah, here are 10 records he might break this season, including some that he just set last year. Last thing before I let you go, I want to get an over/under from you. Over under 6.5, because we talked about kind of between 6 and 7 is where that gap was, I think, in a lot of cases. So between 6 and 7, is sort of where we thought possibly / probably to maybe over under 6.5 of these records get broken this year.
And you put it right at the wrong spot for me, because I feel good about 6. And I'm not saying it's 1 through 6 and then everything else. I mean, I know I kind of said 7, 8, 9, 10. We're all like, yeah. He might not get one of the ones from 1 to 6, and he might get one from 7 to 10. The hook is the issue. I mean, if you're making me have to get to 7 if I'm going to take the over. And if I take the under, ye of little faith, how dare you go against that? But we're talking, again, talking about a program that has had a lot of football. Maybe hasn't had a lot of quarterbacking over all those years. I mean, the game has evolved a lot, but I mean, Ohio State's evolution has been in a very small window. I'm gonna say under. I think that 7 of these is a lot. I mean, and even though I got to take the list down from 15 to 10, giving me 7 of them, hitting 70% of these, just, I don't know. I mean, if we said 6, I would push, but 7 just feels like a lot.
Well, if you enjoy listening to Kevin be a hater and a doubter, will you love the Big Me Kickoff podcast. He hosts that. That is a fantastic show. He just did a live show last week that was dynamite, an hour and a half, just solo, answering your questions. Really good stuff. Those live shows are always great. We should do a live show at some point soon. I miss doing those. Good. We always get great questions. But make sure you check out the Big Me Kickoff podcast wherever you find this. You can also check out the Buckeye Weekly podcast that Tony Gerdeman and I do. Gives in the Bank with Mark Givler and Bill the Bank Green. And of course, Around the Oval with Alex Gleitman. Always a fantastic lineup of podcasts. Great content, all kind of focusing in a little bit of a different area for Ohio State football for each of them, but all worth your time. You can find all of those wherever you find this. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find them. You can subscribe right there and also leave us a 5-star rating and review, which will help other folks find those shows as well. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.